Welcome to another episode of the Jim Powell Report. I'm your host, Jim Powell, and today we're reporting here from the home of Alan Dershowitz on Martha's Vineyard. We're with Professor Dershowitz, and he's just come out with a brand new book. It must be summertime here, 2017, Trumped Up.
Well, it's the Vineyard that has me writing books. I've been on the Vineyard now. This is my 47th year with a few years off. Came in 1969 when Senator Kennedy drove off the bridge and I was part of the legal team defending him. And in the years I've been here, I've written 37 books. So the Vineyard's been very good to me.
Yes, and those 37 books are wonderful reading.
Thank you.
And I am astonished at your remarkable grasp and intelligent commentary on constitutional law, civil liberties, and our American history and how that relates to the rest of the world.
Well, it's interesting because all I talk about really in my new book, Trumped Up, and on television is the law and the Constitution. And people confuse that with politics. I'm a liberal Democrat. I supported Hillary Clinton. I helped her financially and with ideas. I really wanted her to win. And I'm not a supporter of Donald Trump, but I understand the law. And I don't want to see the criminal law expanded to target anybody, whether it be President Trump or Hillary Clinton. Remember, the Republicans were yelling, lock her up, lock her up. They wanted to apply the espionage laws to her because she foolishly had a home email. And that was wrong. And it's wrong also to try to create crimes that aren't applicable because we don't like Donald Trump's politics. And that's the thesis of my book, Trumped Up, how the criminalization of political differences really endangers our democracy.
Yes, and depending on who's in the White House and who their supporters are, and the news media now is so polarized that depending on which channel you're listening to, you're getting propaganda about one party or the other. It seems, anyways, but maybe not so much. And maybe in the long run, the law will prevail and it'll come out.
Well, it will, but it will be an uphill fight. You're absolutely right that the media wants you to hear one side. MSNBC fired one of its best on-camera journalists, Greta Van Susteren, because she was calling it straight down the middle. And they substituted for her a political hack who just always mouths the rhetoric of the hard left and the extremists in the Democratic Party. MSNBC doesn't want you to hear both sides of the issue. And I think we're hearing that on the right and on the left. And the vibrant center is not really being represented adequately in the media today. I don't use the term fake news because I think the news reporting tends to be fairly accurate, and we do have the ability to choose from different news outlets, and we always have the internet, and we can get some of the news fairly directly, but I do think talk shows have become extremely one-sided.
And it makes me wonder if the talk shows have become so polarized to the advantage of their sponsors and selling consumer products and cars or whatever. I don't like the trend that I see.
No, I don't either. By the way, the sponsors don't care if it's extreme right or extreme left as long as people watch it. So you're not seeing sponsors, I think, picking media based on whether they're managers like the left or like the right. They just want to sell their product. And so you get some people without politics selling their product on stations that have very strong political points of view.
One thing that President Trump is doing is using his tweets to get information out. And that's instantaneous communication. I'm wondering if there's any reaction or strategy going back and forth between the organized media outlets and why President Trump has chosen to use tweets.
It served him very well during the campaign. It certainly served him very well during the primaries. It really got him a lot of attention. It got him millions of followers. Whether it serves him well from the Oval Office is a much more difficult question. I can tell you one thing. President Trump has caused me to start tweeting. I never did. I don't even know how to do it. But my wife, who's very smart, won't let me tweet directly because she's afraid I'll say things that I'll later regret. So in order for me to do a tweet, I have to send it to my secretary. She has to look at it. She has to send it back to me. I then show it to my wife. And if it passes muster with my committee, my secretary then has the right to tweet it. And so I haven't had a situation yet where I've regretted what I've tweeted.
It's good to have thoughtful tweets.
Oh, yeah.
Can you imagine how we're talking about things nowadays? Can you discuss a little bit more about the criminalization and how the civil liberties are being affected?
Yeah. It happened on both sides. When Hillary Clinton made the mistake of having a personal home computer, immediately everybody assumed that was a crime. And it's not. You can't find it in the statute. People said it's treason, but the Constitution defines treason. People said it's espionage, but espionage is clearly defined by statute. The same thing happened with Donald Trump when he fired Comey. Oh, it must be a crime. It's not a crime. It's in the Constitution that he is the head of the executive branch, and he can hire and fire whomever he pleases. And you can't turn a constitutional power into a crime just because you don't like the way it was exercised. And so I'm very worried. You know, in the bad old days of Stalin and the Soviet Union, the head of the KGB said to Stalin, "You show me the man and I'll find you the crime." And I don't want to ever see that happen. I think a lot of partisan Democrats are now looking to create crimes out of Donald Trump's conduct, which they disagree with. Republicans did the same thing with Hillary Clinton. I think it's dangerous whichever side does it.
Could this be something that, without long-term strategizing and forethought and dedication to the rule of the constitutional law, that it could actually create a backlash that could negatively impact the Democratic and the Republican Party and actually make people want to form a different party, or create so much indifference and apathy that we could have either one?
Well, one thing is clear. It's making good people not want to run for office because they don't want to have to be constantly hiring lawyers and trying to defend themselves against criminal charges. And I think you get a lot of good people who just today won't get into politics. By the way, that's true not only in the United States, it's true in many other parts of the world. As we speak, the long-term Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, is also being threatened with criminal indictment for taking too many cigars or too many bottles of champagne, or having this conversation with the publisher of a newspaper, or that conversation, none of which, in my mind, should be the basis for removing somebody from his elected position as Prime Minister. But we're seeing it happening there, we're seeing it happening here. We would have seen it happen if Hillary Clinton had been elected. They'd be moving for her impeachment from the day she was sworn in. And I think it's a mistake on both sides.
Mm-hmm. They're not settling, they're not letting the election settle things.
That's right.
And they just keep pushing and whining. I always say when there's too much whining, people aren't working hard enough. Mm-hmm. So I did a little homework. I'm really glad and will be very interested in reading this book because it's for our time.
It's an ebook initially. It comes out on Amazon as an ebook. Anybody can get it. It's just a few dollars. And then it'll be out in a regular book form in a couple of weeks.
Oh, that's good. We'll be ready. And we'd like to talk a little bit about not just the political differences that are endangering America's democracy, but specifically you've had some personal and professional connection to the State of Israel.
Yep.
And I'd like to talk a little bit about it because I've been interested. I know 20 years ago you wrote a great book called The Vanishing American Jew, mm-hmm. and came across some points, and I wanted to do a little bit of homework and be prepared because as you're constantly teaching, educating, doing a great video at Prager University mm-hmm. on the legitimacy and the steps to nationhood of Israel.
Right.
And laid that out from the Balfour Declaration to the...
Which is 100th anniversary this year. It was 1917, yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, no country in history has a more legitimate birth certificate than Israel. It was established by law. Not a big surprise. The Balfour Declaration in 1917, various treaties in 1920, the UN divides the land into a state for the Jews and a state for Palestinian Arabs. It's a completely legitimate birth certificate, as distinguished from so many other countries which were born in violence and in bloodshed. And yet Israel's legitimacy is constantly questioned, and it's a double standard. Sure, there were refugees caused because the Arabs attacked Israel and tried to destroy it. At about the same time Israel was established, by the way, India and Pakistan divided, causing millions of refugees. But everybody said that issue has been solved and resolved. Yet the Palestinian refugees still claim that they have a right to return to their land and destroy Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. It's a double standard.
The double standard. And I want to interject about the legitimacy of the peaceful legitimization of Israel's nationhood in 1948. And no sooner had they become a state, a nation state, that they were illegally attacked by all the surrounding Arab states.
Right.
And from May of 1948 to March of 1949. And Israel lost 1% of its population.
1%, 1 out of every 100 people, many of them Holocaust survivors, many of them civilians, because the Palestinian Arabs had a policy when they, for example, got a town called the Etzion to surrender. 23 people came out with their hands up and they were just mowed down and murdered, men, women, and children. Nurses on the way to the Hadassah hospital to treat Arabs and Jews alike. 50-some odd of them were massacred on the road and killed. And so Israel was born in blood, but born in blood defending itself against illegal actions. And when the Jordanians took over the holy sites of Judaism, they didn't have video cameras or security. They just closed it off. No Jew was allowed to pray at the Western Wall. No Jew was allowed to attend Hebrew University. No Jew was allowed to go to Hadassah Hospital. And they turned gravestones into urinals, and the UN didn't say a word.
And that was the official policy. Well, Arab terrorism was the official policy.
Well, it still is, of Hamas, yeah.
And in earlier shows, interviews here, we've talked about Hamas and their connection to Iran.
Right.
And that they're...
Increasing. Even though Hamas is Sunni and Iran is Shia, they've made their connection. And now Iran is supplying all kinds of logistical help to help Hamas build terror tunnels, to capture civilians in Israel, and to rockets. And I was in one of those terror tunnels a few years ago. It's the scariest thing, because the tunnel I was in came up about 500 yards from an elementary school where Hamas was planning to kidnap Jewish children and hold them ransom. And kill them if the ransom wasn't paid.
And a very important point that you brought out in your book and in the other discussions was that through this policy of illegal Arab warfare and terrorism, I mean, it was unprovoked, and that Israel has fully integrated their refugees into the population.
Sure.
But the Arab countries kept their refugees in sanctuaries.
In camps, purposely, deliberately, in order to have the anger fester. If the Pakistanis had done that, there would be no peace between Pakistan and India today. Every other refugee problem has been resolved, ultimately.
And Israel's been multicultural.
Multicultural, I mean, it has, many of its highest officials are immigrants from Arab countries, from Russia, from African countries. It's one of the most multicultural countries in the world. It's also multi-religious. There are 8 million Israelis, 6 million of whom are Jewish, but 2 million of whom are of multiple and different religions. And every country has its problems, and Israel is not immune from those problems. But to single out Israel, for example, to have gay rights and lesbian organizations focus only on Israel, when Israel has the best record of rights toward gay and lesbian people of any country in the Middle East. In Arab countries, gays are murdered and raped and thrown off buildings. And where do they come when they escape? They run to Israel because they know that Israel will give them sanctuary. And yet lesbian and gay rights organizations, many of them, have turned against Israel and toward countries that oppress gay and lesbian people. It makes no sense.
And with Israel's policy towards all groups of people, they've also become the second or third highest in innovation and
startup nation. Per capita, it's the highest by far. But even in terms of absolutes, and Israel's a tiny country, Israel has more patents than all of Europe and more startup industries than all of Europe. It's second to the United States. China is doing a lot of innovation as well, but those are giant countries. Israel's a tiny country that has more listings on NASDAQ, more patents, more startup countries. Everybody uses Israeli products all the time. Waze, you drive around, you use Waze. It was invented by an Israeli. Many of the most important elements of computers were developed by Israelis. You know, Israel doesn't have natural resources. It only has human resources.
But through its innovation, it's developed agricultural irrigation systems that have
used all over the world.
Desert and literally made profits.
They're making a new one, and I'm part of that now because they have a new company now called WaterGen, which takes water out of the atmosphere and brings it into the home and turns it into water. So this new technology can make it rain any day, can bring the water that's up there in the atmosphere into a little machine and make the water available, whether it be in a desert or in a farm or in a city or in a rural area. And I introduced this product in Washington not so long ago at an APAC meeting. People were just shocked. We actually saw it done. We saw the machine, it was on the table. The water came from the atmosphere into the machine, and I drank it. It tasted good because it was rainwater.
And that's the important thing. It tasted good.
It tasted good, yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, the remarkable story of Israel today, innovation and growth, was forged through many events, including the Holocaust, and it's made growth in Israel and movement to Israel an important thing. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing this correctly. The phrase "make aliyah,"
Aliyah, which means going up. It's just a metaphor. So when you travel to Israel, you go up to Israel. You make aliyah to Israel. And when you leave Israel, you go down. It's a little egocentric, obviously, to make it
down.
Right. Yeah, it's true. It's true. But that has to do with the winds.
Yeah, I know.
I guess Jerusalem is on a hill. So when you go to Jerusalem, you really are going up to Jerusalem, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. But by the way, another one of the most beautiful cities in the world is the city of Ramallah, which is now a Palestinian city, which has no Israeli troops, no Israeli soldiers, no Israeli policemen. It's a completely autonomous Palestinian city. It's the capital, the functioning capital. When I go to Israel, I go there from time to time. I visit with the prime minister and other leading officials. But it's a beautiful city, and it's the future. It's what a Palestinian state could look like if the Palestinians were willing to recognize Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people and sit down and negotiate a reasonable peace.
God bless you.
Well, I hope it happens, and I'd like to help out, and
You're
I'm trying my best.
Process. You're part of the process, and just like the American Revolution didn't start overnight, I know there were ministers preaching from Boston in 1757,
right,
that got people riled up, and they left the sermon. I'm thinking one by Dr. John Mayhew in West Church in Boston, and there were some gentlemen that listened. And
sure, Sam Adams, he was
Adams,
inspired.
and it kept making people...
Right, and Sam Adams condemned his cousin John Adams, saying he was too conservative. Why was he representing the British soldiers who committed the Boston massacre? So here you had cousins arguing with each other. Sam, the more radical guy, and of course Sam is remembered today for having a wonderful Boston beer named after him, which I love. Sam Adams and John Adams, you know, was a great president.
Well, and through this lively and rigorous discussion, the arguments, there's a humanity and a civility to it.
And you remember, America fought the revolution more cleanly than any country had ever fought a war before that. Nobody teaches that anymore. That George Washington, when he was the head of our army, he said, we do not kill civilians, we do not mistreat our prisoners. He engaged in no war crimes, whereas war crimes were committed by the British against American civilians. Washington insisted on fighting the cleanest war. He wanted to have the moral authority on his side. This is a time the French Revolution is about to commence, where they were cutting off the heads of civilians. Washington insisted. He wanted the American Revolution to go down in history as a clean war with no war crimes, and he succeeded beyond anybody's expectations.
That's a great distinction, yes. And we know that the British were right here on Martha's Vineyard. Yeah, they came right short here. Well, these crimes, whether they were committed during the American Revolution or during the Arab terrorism, is Israel's legitimate growth as a nation.
It's amazing. You know, they started in 1948, there were 600,000. Now there are 6 million Jews and 2 million non-Jews, and it's growing.
In Israel.
In Israel, it's now, you know, bigger than some of the European countries, some of the Scandinavian countries, and it has a better gross national product. It has really thrived despite being surrounded by enemies, many of whom are sworn to its destruction. On the northern border, it has Hezbollah, and it has Iran and Syria. To the west, it has an increasingly belligerent Iraq, which is controlled by, to the east, Iran. To the west, it has Egypt and Gaza. So it has been amazing how a tiny little country the size of New Jersey has contributed so much to the world in less than 70 years of its existence.
Let's talk about something that isn't that popular, but needs to be put. It's the bull in the china shop. You ask a great question in your Prager University video. It's a great primer. I'd love all my viewers to see it so they can really understand. And you lay this out. We'll actually include it. How can this worldwide attack, the question you put, how can this worldwide attack on Israel alone be explained through anti-Semitism?
Unfortunately, there's an awful lot of that. A double standard applied to the nation state of the Jewish people. More is expected of them, more is demanded of them. They're criticized for things that other countries do far worse. And people don't understand, again, that Israel is surrounded. As many Israeli leaders have said, if the Palestinians were to put down their arms, there'd be peace. If Israel were to put down its arms, there'd be genocide. There's no doubt about that. And so Israel, tragically, has to remain armed. Imagine what the peace dividend would look like if Israel could turn its swords into plowshares, as the Bible suggests. If Israel could turn its nuclear weapons into nuclear medicine. Can you imagine what the peace dividend would be for the world? Because Israel has so many innovative people. They have had so many Nobel Prizes compared to their population. And they want to do good. They want to help, but the world really hasn't allowed that.
Is that because of this policy of lawfare?
Lawfare is part of it. I mean, the Palestinian leadership has realized they can't defeat Israel militarily, so they're trying to defeat them through the misuse of the law and the misuse of human rights. They're trying to take their leaders to the International Criminal Court. I know I've spoken to the people, the prosecutors in the International Criminal Court. I went to the International Criminal Court to make a presentation. And they tried to bring cases in front of the other courts, the International Court of Justice, the United Nations, but they won't succeed. The only way to have peace is for the two groups, the Palestinians and the Israelis, to sit down with no preconditions and negotiate a compromise peace that both sides have to give up things.
And with discussions that I've heard before with Israel not wanting to give up the Golan Heights because it's up on top of the hill.
And it can't do it now.
You could rain destruction down on the city.
And Syria would take it over, and if Syria took it over, it would be Iran. So Iran would be looking down at Israeli cities and towns. So I don't think anybody today has been urging the Israelis to give back the Golan. You know, maybe in 50 years, maybe when Syria becomes a non-belligerent country, some agreement can be made. But right now, there's no possibility to return the Golan Heights. But there is a possibility of Israel helping to create a Palestinian state on 90-something% of the West Bank. And I think that would make a lot of sense.
Well, that's remarkably true, I believe, with your assessment and opinion of that. I am looking forward to looking at this book, Trumped Up, online, Amazon.com with ebook. And then we'll be able to also purchase copies.
I'm going to be speaking about it at the Chilmark Library. It's the end of August sometime, and the books will be available hopefully then. as well.
That's good.
No, I write every single morning on the Vineyard. I get up early, I write, and then I quit at about 11:45 and go and have lunch. So that's my work day on the Vineyard, which is always fun.
It's a remarkable environment. I know coming here to the Vineyard, a lot of people have felt the energy. We actually have a writer staying at our house this summer, and they actually own a home up in Aquina, but they have a apartment at our inn.
Good, good.
They come down just to write.
Yeah, that's what I do.
And
My wife chases me away. I try to use the dining room table here to write, but I have an office upstairs, so she often chases me to go upstairs. But I like to be among my family. I like to see everybody. So that's our constant battle. Do I get isolated to my office, or do I get to write right here?
well, this is great to be at the dining room table with you today, and I can see you have another project you're working at the other end of the table.
I'm always working on 2 or 3 projects, and this dining room table has had some of the most wonderful guests that we've had for dinner. Tonight we're having a string quartet that's playing at the Chilmark Community Center, and after they play, they're coming over here, and we're having a reception for them because we promote music, we promote Chilmark, and we do a lot of those kinds of events in this house as well too.
You do a lot of good things here in the community, and it's always a pleasure to come up here. This is the 4th?
Yeah. No, I think we have tenure with each other now, 4 years.
That's right. That's right.
You got me every year, so just keep interviewing me, keep doing great things for the Vineyard.
Wonderful, and thank you for your continued writing. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you very much for being with us this afternoon at the home of Alan Dershowitz. Professor Dershowitz has just written the book Trumped Up, and he's a noted professor, attorney, and citizen of our wonderful nation. Thank you very much. I'm Jim Powell, your host. We'll see you again real soon.